Good morning. Do Hindus have a monopoly on Dharma, or is it a broader Indo-European notion? If you asked many Hindus to identify a cornerstone concept to our faith, I have no doubt that they would cite one word, Dharma, fantastically complex in its applications both theoretical and tangible or practical. There is no getting around its saliency, not just for the Hindu sphere, but also for those other religions which have their origin in the Sanskritized milieu, such as Buddhism and Jainism. However, recently I've wound up embroiled in a series of arguments with people about the nature and the exclusivity of this concept, what it really means, and who really has access to such a thing. I shan't bore you with the details, except to state that one was with a probably well-meaning Indian chap who appeared to want to insist that there was an Indian or Hindu monopoly upon Dharma, and the other was with a calumnious Zoroastrian heretic attempting to push the notion that Hinduism had abandoned Rita, more upon that in a moment, in favour of this new concept called Dharma. Now the latter is just outright wrong, as we shall soon see, but the former is correct in some ways, but incomplete and incorrect in others. We shall also see what I mean by that in due course. For now, let us get acquainted with some of the core terms, so that we may move on to our comparative explication. First, what is Dharma? Dharma is often praised as being difficult to translate. In some senses this is true, but I tend to find that duty does a reasonable job of getting across the basic meaning of the term, with additional shades of fate and, of course, righteousness. The fact that we don't always think duty can fill in for Dharma in English translations of Sanskrit texts has less to do with the perceived untranslatability of Dharma, I feel, and rather more to do with the fashion in which duty has become quite the devalued term over the centuries in the West. Once upon a time, giving an oath, a word, meant something quite tangible. Now, it is as insubstantial as the proverbial oral contract, not worth the paper it is printed upon. But I digress. Duty is one thing, but a duty to what? Or, for that matter, whom? Well, at that point, we must introduce another concept, rita. Rita, in essence, means cosmic order, or cosmic law. It is identified out of universe with Brahman, the Absolute. And this Absolute is a priori to the universe, being expressed in universe in quite a number of ways, including as the fundamental underpinning to the fact that there is even a universe to speak of to begin with. And I say to speak of, because per the wonderful theology of C.A.R, Vasudevi may also be thought of as an in-universe expression of Rita as Brahman. Hence, in no small part, why words in the empowered speech, and spoken also with intent for maximum impact and efficacy, have such power as they do, because they enable the interaction with this fundamental cogs and gears and fabric of the world. There are pretty strong cognate understandings for this notion of rita to be found elsewhere across the Indo-European world. Orlog, in Old Norse, is a personal favourite, as it effectively means supernal law, and there are a whole sphere of ancient Greek and etc. terms to express the fundamentally contiguous concept in their various versions of the Indo-European cosmology. Indeed, cosmos itself, quite literally, refers to the notion of order, a cosmic order, thus becoming something of a fundamentally mutually reinforcing tautology, and thence to the expanse under said order, the universe, generally in our modern parlance, in much the same manner as a regime. and further showing just how closely cognate these metaphysical understandings are, in terms of both the metaphysical and the mythic. The close identification of goddesses with the cosmic aura is something that continually occurs amidst the various Indo-European descendant peoples. Amongst the Romans, Cybele, Magna Mater, is spoken of in just such terms amidst the works of Lucretius. We also have the Greek constellation of the female divinity linked to their relevant concepts of justice and divine law, and for that matter, the avenging of the breaches of same. And I have recently managed to demonstrate a further expression of this amidst the Nordic Germanic sphere, Viaskadi, the binding of Loki, and the serpent-expressed punishment of that figure, fitting the typology in question quite neatly. Consult my recent work on the serpentine form of the Earth Mother, there for additional details. Whilst the situation of Frigg, as being supremely acquainted with Orlog, cf. Locasena 29, is most definitely relevant here also. The situation may reach its highest point with Vedic Aditi, not only directly identified with this aforementioned concept of Rita, this aforementioned concept of Brahman, but spoken of by the Vedic Rishi Thonasepa in Arvi 1:24, as being also, in effect, the state of law and lawfulness to which one should wish to be properly foundationally in concord with, being returned to the proper paths of piety and modus vivendi, is akin to being reunited with her. So how does Rita intersect with Dharma? Well, Dharma expresses this etymologically. The root of the term effectively means to hold or to support. We might even say to depend. That is to say, that one's Dharma is dependent upon Rita. One's duty is our contingent understanding to the broader cosmic law, but also that one's duty, properly engaged in, acts to support and to uphold the immanency of Rita, of cosmic law, here in this universe of ours, something quite vital if we wish for our universe to continue to actually be habitable within for our kind. We do not prosper. Indeed, nothing but the forces of self-destructive demonic iniquity do well, when cosmic law is being actively abjured and sundered. You can see that, to take but one brief example, in the situation entailed in the rise to power of the demon Durga Masura, who wiped out the knowledge of sacral conduct from the minds of men, and presided over an age of starvation and drought as a result, because the natural order of things had become woefully disrupted, the gods disempowered, and chaos reigned all around. It was only put an end to, violently, by Vashdevi as Durga, specifically as Shakambari, appearing to personally set things right again. That is to say, cosmic order appearing in beautiful and beautifully destructive goddess form to rewater the cosmos with the blood of slain demon armies and breathe restored life and law and light back into the worlds. But again, I digress. The point is, how one is supposed to do one's duty, to uphold Rita. That is one's Dharma. And these things can manifest in just as many ways as there are people, and subjective personal experiences of living in this universe of ours. It is difficult to really generalize a human Dharma all up, except in the broadest possible terms. Of course, piety is a rather good general start. Although as we refine down the granularity upon which our perspective, say, as we go from human to Kshatriya, and by this I mean quite specifically Indian Kshatriyas of a rather particular period in ethos, we arrive at a rather more specific understanding of just what it is that we are meant to do, and how it is we are meant to approach the problems around us in order to make more fully our contribution and uphold our duty. The Kshatriya example I have cited, because it is one of the most well-known Hindu religious texts, the Bhagavad Gita, is largely a treatise upon what is termed Kshatriya Dharma, hence in part why it has such emphasis upon doing the right thing, regardless of various feelings and ephemeral considerations upon the matter. When the avatar of the god, in this case Krishna or Vishnu, informs you that your cousins over on the other side of the battlefield and the civil war must be put to the sword in service of the immanency of Dharma in this world, hence why Kurukshetra is occasionally referred to as a Dharma Yuddha, a war for the saliency of righteousness in the sage. Well, you do it, and if you are Kshatriya, because it is what you are there to do. Personally, I tend to think that may very well be Kshatriya Dharma. But not only is there some place for the creative, the critical thinking, within the realms of the Kshatriya, in pursuit of the righteous and proper principles, but that if we are a Brahmin, say, then as we are acting as the brain of the nation and society rather than the arms, this means that there are quite a lot more necessity for thinking to be taking place. Although also, of course, a lot of doing, and particularly a lot of perceiving, including acting as the guides and instructors for those who are more inclined towards the doing end of things. The head of society, after all, contains both memory and major sense organs. Now this is not supposed to be an in-depth meditation upon the Katarvana, Purusha model of society, so we shall not be examining in depth what everybody is supposed to be doing under that schema, nor how these actually map over, occasionally rather usefully, to some elements of pre-modern European culture and society, although it gets rather complicated as applies the Jarl caste, for instance, in the Nordic model. However, there is something important to that distinction we have just made that goes right to the heart of what my Indian interlocutor had been attempting to push forward. Namely, that as various Indo-European societies outside of the Hindu sphere have quite different interlocking parts in societal models, it quite naturally follows that they are also going to have rather different understandings of just what it is that the members of those societies are supposed to be doing. If we agree that a Kshatriya and a Brahmin are going to have different, although overlapping, dharmas, then it stands to reason that even despite the overt similarities between a Kshatriya and a knight, that some culturally specific understandings are going to also be quite occurrent within the specific groupings which have given rise to and informed those identities. Indeed, we often take things rather further, and to say that just as a Kshatriya and a Brahmin have different usual manners to make their dharmatic contributions to the immanency of Rita, so too may different descendant Indo-European societies and their religious complexes have different ways to do things likewise. Not wrong or superior or inferior necessarily, although some of these shall obviously have become degraded and misaligned and via misunderstandings, via the passage of the ages, human error and interpolation. They're not wrong necessarily, they're just different, subject to the aforementioned. In this sense then, I do not think it inaccurate to agree that as applies Dharma, it is a Hindu concept, although occurrent in somewhat different senses in other Sanskrit-shaped religious spectra, as briefly noted above, and that we should tread lightly about presuming to speak of the Dharma of a Greek man practicing the Hellenic religion, or a Nordic revivalist engaged likewise. If we want to push it, then it is not necessarily inaccurate to say that they have a Dharma each, in that generalized sense, But the actual interpretation of that, and the conceptual nuances brought to bear when unpacking the term, are going to be different to what a Hindu would have taken as the face value application of the term in specia. So yes, endeavouring to just extract out a term such as dharma and apply it everywhere does decontextualize the notion and make something more particularly Indian into something Indo-European, arguably unnecessarily. I say arguably unnecessarily because the conceptual understanding, at its core communicated by dharma, is not unique to the term dharma, nor to the Hindu sphere. There are quite an array of other Indo-European terms more specific to those descendant cultures in question, which convey quite the same general idea. And to those we shall now turn. The closely comparative conceptry of the Greeks, Eusebia, Dikaiosune, Themis, Moira. Now, one that a more recently met associate has pointed out to me is Eusebia, an ancient Greek term actually used quite directly to translate dharma into ancient Greek by Ashoka in one of his more famous inscriptions. It is actually a rather good fit, and indeed the notion of a good fit is quite important for rita, sukha, for instance, being understandable as the joy derived from moving well in congruence with one's dharma, with the essential underpinning meaning to it being to do the righteous thing. Eu meaning as in good, sebia from sebamai, effectively meaning a sense of being God-fearing. And that is rather literal for the Greeks, for obvious reasons. They had much to be fearful of, as we all do. And thence undertaking action aware of both the awe of the divine and the holy terror of what happens to you should you attempt to go actively against same. We might think of it as applied piety in that sense, for it took on a broad range of particular areas under the aegis in terms of social relationships and cultural custom, all of which were underpinned and overseen by the gods, and, as we have noted above, with both divine figures, goddesses for the most part, as the positive expressions of these, as well as via the Ernies and Nemesis, who could also preside over positive desserts, we must add, the negative and the enforcement aspect likewise. I tend to point to Dikaiosune when I am after a Greek rendering for rita, as what it means, that which is pointed out from Proto-Indo-European dik, the root for Greek dactyl, meaning finger or digit, the Germanic teach, via the dt sound shift, which we're of course quite familiar with, like dent becomes tooth, for instance, and Latinate dictate, dictator, etc., all of which effectively build from its pointing original kernel of meaning. These nicely convey the sense of something which is already immanent, yet which not all of us may be able to perceive, thus requiring the seer to do just exactly that, to point out what it is that is just. And certainly, justice is what the term most usually means, the fulfillment of the law, but also the general essential quality of law to begin with, which again takes us back to the ancient Greek Dike and the goddess of that particular name. Astrea, for those of you who are taking an interest in the heavens, forms the figure of Virgo in Western astrology, precisely due to this concept, pointing out the righteous conduct, and hence also pointing, perhaps, at Libra, the bearer of the scales of justice. The situation of Astrea, having vanished from this mortal globe of ours in order to take up stance and station midst the heavens, is also quite relevant, as in a similar manner to how the saliency of Rita declines and diminishes over the course of the Yuga cycle, eventually seeming much more seriously significantly absent during the current Yuga. So too does it appear that the Greeks thought the cosmic aura became an ever more remote graha, that being a body exerting gravity, for those of you not familiar with the Sanskrit, we might say from the same root, and also tends to mean a celestial object, although never quite vanishing entirely. and still being very much visible, if you knew where to look. Pointing upwards, we might say, to the celestial spheres, where she still stands to this day, to inspire and to lift our gazes, and our aspirations for the good life, the pious life, likewise illuminating the dark night. Another point of relevancy would of course be Themis, both in terms of the goddess by that name, but also the notion of the divine law, directly entailed by the therein and the accompanying noun. Themis means both divine law and of course divine justice, but also the active expression of that law, via custom and our adherency thereto, as well as going the other way, via various sendings and oracular manifestations to man from the gods in the broader divine realm, that which is pointed out indeed, which implies that certain oracular events are actually somebody correctly perceiving the underlying plan and ordering of the universe, getting a peek at the script for the cosmic drama or the divine play we might perhaps suggest. I mention Themis here because there is actually a rather good fitting, again, between what is understood by Rita, wherein the divine order, the cosmic law, is in fact over and above the gods, and also binding upon them, and what we get from the Greek perspectives upon her. In Antoninus Liberalis' Metamorphoses, for instance, we find Zeus wanting to smite some humans who have disturbed the sanctity of a holy site to make off with the wealth contained therein, and being told sternly by Themis et al. That even he is unable to kill anybody upon such incredibly sacred ground, and so, relenting, he instead turns the impious would-be desecrators into birds instead. As it happens, the theme of sacred ground being inviolable to killing is a broadly pan-Indo-European one. A major example that many shall be familiar with concerns the C.A.R, not putting the Fenris wolf to death precisely because said wolf was in such a space, and to do so would be to violate cosmic law. The concept of the Moira, I should say, and of Moira is also relevant here. We would know these in modern English perhaps as the fates and fate respectively. Dharma, in the sense of one's fate, or if we are being less heavy-handed perhaps one's calling, has obvious conceptual symmetry to this notion, as, after all, the mode of one's contributory duty being allotted and apportioned to one is fairly exactly what the Moira in question is also intended to encompass. We are simply taking the broader view and extrapolating it from the just, the ultimate outcome, to also the process, via which said outcome may be reached and entailed, something quite reasonably in concordancy with what the Greeks had actually understood via the concept. All things considered, while it is evident that we are dealing with multiple terms in the ancient Greek lexicon of considerable coterminity to what we are meaning by Dharma and Rta in various ways, I have little doubt that the same ultimate underpinning to Indo-European understandings, that of an overarching divine law and cosmic order, with an array of in-universe, in-community, and indeed in-person, tangible expressions and pathway guides for virtuous action and congruence thereto, are being communicated in each cultural context. Enough so that, historically speaking at least, some degree of simple direct translation was even evidently viable between them. Next, the lexical language of the Latins, piety made manifest amongst men. There are similarly multiple terms, concepts, and theistic embodiments of each which are relevant for us from the Romans. However, for reasons of space, because I have always and already perhaps waxed over lyrical in my preceding comparanda, as well as the fact that the proper Latin cognate is quite direct, these mean that I shall focus only upon the one. That is Pietas, also known via its adjectival form pius, and its definition Lambert matches up strikingly well with what we are comprehending via Dharma. Whereas Dharma we may approach as being the duty-bound adherence to the divine law, and consequent conduct in support of the proper immanency of same, here in this reality sphere of ours. Pietas connotes the congruence of the individual, their deeds and direction in life with the Ius Divinum, the divine law. It is also, absolutely uncoincidentally, the root for modern English piety, although again, the terms have shifted in scope down the ages, so whereas once piety and duty were effectively the same, or at least strongly coterminous and therefore overlapping concept tree, in the modern age the two are seen as quite significantly separate, at least in the secular, civic sphere. The scope of Roman pietas was not merely confined to what we, with modern eyes, might have thought to be the realm of the more overtly divine, but also found itself capaciously exercised with relation to various other spheres of human activity, human society, values, and endeavour. One could express pietas in one's proper conduct, towards one's parents for instance, and quite prominently in one's relationship to the state. These are, in truth, also very much divine relevant actions and engagements. It is only that we fail to see these days our interactions with our forebears, whether the immediate ones, our parents, or the ones far further back, our ancestors, Pietas, etc., or with the nation around us, in such breathtakingly luminous terms. The Hindu understandings of Dharma have, as should be entirely unsurprising to us by now, directly comparable comprehensions. For us, the highest act of piety is the devotion to and service of one's parents, as beautifully explicated via the myth of Skanda and Ganesha, having a race around the world, and little Ganesha beating his brother. And while Skanda had rushed off to circumambulate the globe, Ganesha had instead simply marched around his parents, for to him they were his world. And in a suitably paired maxim we also state that, to quote in translation, mother and motherland are superior even to heaven. And you can see my analysis of that in a article aptly entitled, Mother and Motherland are higher than heaven, an Arya Akasha analysis of a beauteous maxim, as well as, perhaps, the Bharat Mata article I had penned for Indian Independence Day, 2018, for further explication upon these matters. Again, we could, if we wished, go into much more expansively expressive elocution upon the subjects of the metaphysical, reputational, and ethical fundaments of the life of the Roman in antiquity, which would further flesh out our Latin comparanda to the Hindu concepts of Dharma and Rta. But for now it is enough. Next, Orlog and Orglosa amongst the Old Norse. One of the most revealing, and revealingly direct, expressions for the understanding we are after, amidst any Indo-European people, occurs in the Nordic scriptural canon, in the Voluspa. I have written upon this passage, it is from, detailing the creation and investiture of humankind elsewhere. See my earlier work on the Indo-European symbolism of the ash tree and the ensuing origins of the spear race of man. However, it is most definitely worth zeroing in upon this particular element, this one word, which so succinctly encapsulates what we are on about here. That word is Orlog, which of course has a number of different spellings and pronunciations which we won't trifle with. What does it mean? Well, the more usually encountered translation for it is not a bad one, although it is perhaps somewhat incomplete, as it is inevitably the case with most translations from just about any liturgical language into modern English. You shall frequently find it written as fateless, lacking in Wyrd or Urdr. What does it mean in context? Well, at this point in the Voluspa, Urdr, Hunir, and Lodr have encountered two barely alive beings, the primogenitor pairing of Askar and Embla. They are described as being barely alive. Wood, prior to its shaping and sculpting, by the master craftsman, to speak somewhat figuratively. More literally, we are given a list of characteristics emblematic of living, sentient beings, which the pair at that stage so lack, and correspondingly a list of qualities imparted into them by the attendant gods. There are a few intriguing elements to these, and I have considered a number of these elsewhere, such as the investiture of breath, ond, also translated aptly enough as soul, cf. the Vyomakisha concept tree from the Sanskrit, by Urdr, resonating with a similar Vedic understanding. However, what is relevant for our purposes is much more implicit understanding, between the concluding lines of verse 17 and those of verse 20. There we see, along with the explicit list of characteristics imbued into the ancestors of the race of mankind, there is another element. The one that takes us from the status of Orlog Lausa to having Orlog Sigya, the latter meaning something akin to the Orlog of men, although with Sigya, which I am presuming to be a genitive indicative plural for Sigur, actually having a slightly more nuanced set of meanings contingent upon the era. In more modern Nordic speech, frequently referring to a hero or a soldier. In Old Norse itself, to a man. In its Proto-Germanic antecedent, Sagyas, to a warrior or a retainer, and hailing ultimately from the Proto-Indo-European seku, meaning to follow. It would be tempting, therefore, to presume that something quite archaic has been preserved via the Voluspa's particular piquant choice of phrasing. Notionally, that which makes a man, or for that matter a woman, is his or her following of their connection to the Orlog, their Wyrd. And this is something which must be adhered to with the duty-bound allegiancy and sterling protectiveness of the soldier, just as a warrior of the high Germanic age would have zealously protected his lord, of whose household he was part. Or perhaps it is merely a poetic means to say man in this context, and I'm overreading things rather wildly. However, what we can say is that the dominant theme of the final third of verse 20 of the Voluspa is also the provision of life to mankind by the ash maidens of Yggdrasil, something done not only via the unfurling of the general sphere of law out from that radiating central axis mundi, but also via the specific spark of connection to the general Orlog, which is imbued therefrom into each of us. For you see, that is just what the axis mundi represents in the Indo-European conceptual schema. It is the immanency of cosmic law from above and beyond the universe, running through our universe, and about which our universe rotates according to its rhythm and regulating regimen. Indeed, there is an archaic Vedic understanding of this post as being the axle of a mighty chariot wheel revolving in just such a manner. This is why we find such pointed remarks in, say, the Grimnismal, about the draconic demons, or the demonic dragons, I should say, which gnaw upon the tree that is Yggdrasil. For the forces of chaos ever strive to usurp, undermine, and ultimately to destroy the saliency of the law within our worlds. And it is also why, elsewhere in the Germanic canon, we find otherwise cryptic mentions for the oblations and applications of the white liquid of the well of Urdr to the limbs of the tree, because in a manner akin to the usage of milk or panchamrit in Shivling Puja, the ritual offerings upon the Shivling, itself a miniature axis mundi resonant to the same god as that of the Irminsul. It represents the nourishment and revitalization of this tree of law, the reapplication of something from the wellspring of light and life and law that is directly comparable to this symbolic pouring of the Amrit allegorical, so as to help to repair and stabilize the damage from the ongoing demonic chaotic attack. And that is why I say that the Nordic preservation of these concepts is both succinct and seriously profound. For within it, we see the essential truths, that what makes us human is in fact not merely the possession of the relevant DNA, nor even the ability to speak, but our essence and our essential imbued spark of duty, the cosmic auric conduit which is within us, and with that duty also entailing the protection, maintenance, and serving of the cosmic law which makes life within this universe of ours possible in the first instance, through the tangible applications of piety and following our fate, which may also incorporate that more actively militant understanding of C.A.R, as applies dealing to those malefic forces of chaos and iniquity, which would seek the ruination of same, the casting down of the tree and the Dharma Rta which stands thereupon. Hence why I made such a point of noting the relevant linguistics and previous and post-formulations of C.A.R above, because the relationship of a lord to his, although really this is a case of a queen, but therefore to her warriors, that is the situation of Orlog, cosmic order to mankind. If we choose to take up the responsibility, and if we do not, well, then we are not really, in the Germanic sense, living up to the standards set down for us of what it is which constitutes mankind. Next part. The logical labelling of law and the evanescence of essence. Now I began this article by noting that it had been sparked through a series of conversations/conflagrations, around me it's often quite the same thing, I had been party to over the past few days. One of them was with a presumably well-meaning Indian man, who appeared to wish to argue that Dharma itself was only directly found in the Hindu sphere, and this therefore meant that Dharma itself, i.e. the core concept, rather than the mere labelling, although we are, as ever, acutely conscious that the words have power. Nominative determinism is a thing, and as my associate Urdr just pithily observed, that means that linguistics is theology. This was similarly something effectively exclusive to those environs. We have, I think, reasonably conclusively demonstrated that whilst the precise shapings and applications of some of the understandings of this core element do vary amidst the different descendant Indo-European peoples, the most important components, the seed, the root, the bough, the lifeblood of the tree, are very much shared amongst us all, even though up here amidst the branches and the leaves of letterings, it can occasionally be quite easy to lose sight of the wood and the tree, amidst the squabblings of sparrows nor squirrels seated amidst the twiggery. The labels are different, but these are exterior flowerings and blossomings from this central and incredibly ancient same. Dharma Rta, indeed, same rule, everywhere, as the divine imperium, the empire of eternity, is known. And where the essence runs true, the expression can indeed be permitted some necessary leeway in how it is put across in order to protect and preserve in it amidst different lands, times, and circumstances. However, I also mentioned another encounter I had, which played a significant role in stirring up my thoughts to action upon this score. One of an occasional unpleasantness of having to deal with a Zoroastrian who purported to place their own faith above ours, snidely deriding Hinduism for purportedly engaging in dereliction of Rita in favour of a more exclusive exaltation of Dharma, as if these two were different concepts. And then adding insult to earlier insult, I hesitate to call it injury, except perhaps to my patience, by proclaiming that the Zoroastrians had the greater and grander still living emphasis upon Rita via a cognate Avestan term in their religion, as if this somehow meant, I suppose, that they were the true post-Andronovo, indeed downright post-Proto-Indo-European, Indo-Iranian Orthodox continuance religion. Perish the thought. I mention this particular incident here, not simply in passing, but because it illuminates something quite substantively important that also goes back toward responding to my Indian interlocutor from this other, more mild exchange. In the Zoroastrian case, I have little doubt that, as with various of their religious terminology, they do indeed have words maintained. But what of the actual concepts they are supposed to represent? Well, to approach the matter directly, I absolutely refuse to believe that a creed, which at its foundational stages sought to have priests of the old Indo-Ironic and therefore Indo-European faith killed and slandered where they were not slain outright, which overtly demonized the gods and otherwise sought to disrupt various of the fundaments of the Indo-European man's relationship with the divine, i.e. prime vectors, via which the cosmic order is immanentized out into us, and out into the worlds under our dominion and stewardship. I refuse to believe that simply because they may happen to have borrowed the linguistic cognate phrasing for rita, etc., that this therefore means that they too have the essence to go along with the labelling. In fact, their use for it, I would contend, to be something more akin to the Sanskrit druh. In their language it is druj, cognate as it happens with the Old Norse draugr, a term which, at once, means a demon and an enemy, an injury and an infliction, violence and more pointedly a violation. It also means a lie, a falsehood, a sense that the Zoroastrians have latched onto as the major understanding to the term. And in truth, this is indeed effectively what its Proto-Indo-European origin, Proto-Indo-European drug, refers to, although which is somewhat less prominent in Sanskrit, and instead, for us, more implicit. We understand that the demon, via its actions against cosmic law, is against truth, and continuously undermining same. But that is a rant for another time. The point is, it is easy to focus only upon the labels, and lose sight of what is actually contained within them. And therefore to end up in a situation wherein, because ancient Greek or Latin or Old Norse doesn't have a suitably obvious direct linguistic cognate for dharma, one presumes that these Indo-European peoples had no such concept themselves likewise, or to presume that dharma and rita are somehow separate things, one supplanting the other, rather than the former being the active engagement with and continuous reimmanentization of the a priori, in truth, latter. Each Indo-European perspective upon this similar underlying concept is somewhat different in how it is expressed, and some piquant details of its interpretation and livid relationship of understanding, no doubt. Just as each Indo-European religion and each Indo-European language are similarly distinctive in their flavouring and the native earth they have come to call home. Yet we are all also united and bonded, not merely by chains of descent running back to the Urdr in linguistic and even genetic and cultural senses, but by something far more fundamental, both to us, to ourselves, indeed our sense of self likewise, and to the universe entire. We are brought back together by the sense of connection we all share to that which we all are fundamentally connected to. Cosmic order, rita, Orlog, Dikaiosune, and still other terms besides. However one chooses to phrase it, and via whichever of the multitude of intermediary metaforms one chooses to engage with its notion through, that is what we are here for, and here from as well. For to be Indo-European, in this case, Aryan, in the actual proper sense of the term, not an ethnonym, a race adjective, but something which instead means to know and do the proper thing, to uphold the heritage and perform the pious rites. That is to be a defender of cosmic order. As we would say in Sanskrit, Dharma Rakshati Rakshitaha. Dharma, protected, protects.